Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah wahda wassalatu wassalamu ala man la nabiyya ba'da amma ba'd. فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وكلا نقص عليك من أنباء الرسل ما نثبت به فؤادك صدق الله العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الأمي الكريم ونحن على ذلك لمن الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا وسندنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأزواجه وأصحابه وأتباعه وذرياته. Dear respected mothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran Kareem narrates and relates many different incidents of the people of the past. Different Anbiya alayhimu salatu wassalam's lives were discussed and shared with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Different aspects, different situations, different incidents in their lives were shared with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam over the course of 23 years. Sometimes certain incidents, sometimes certain Nabi. Many a times an incident would be repeated to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a different way. The story would be retold to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would then receive these stories, and being the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, being the very first addressee of the wahi and the revelation and the word and the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and being the individual he was, blessed by Allah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would gain an insight and would gain lessons from these particular stories. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself mentions in the Quran that these stories are narrated to you so that we can strengthen your heart through this. وَكُلًّا نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. The maqsad, the objective, the reason of us informing you of these stories is none other than the fact that we wish to strengthen your heart. We wish to strengthen your heart. You are going through difficult times. At times Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was being taunted. At times Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lost his close and dear ones. At times Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was tortured. At other times Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was fearing for the entire Muslim community, because an army had amassed outside Medina Munawwara ready to attack Medina Munawwara and attack the Muslims. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam throughout his life was going through difficult times. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam these stories, and through these stories Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be granted comfort, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's would be heart, which was at that time going through grief, difficulty, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's heart would be strengthened. وَكُلًّا نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. And thereafter Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَاءَكَ فِي هَذِهِ الْحَقِّ وَمَوْعِظَةٌ وَذِكْرَى لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And in these stories comes to you nothing but truth and naseeha and advice, not only for you but also for the believers as well. وَذِكْرَى لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So these stories are such that they assist an individual. That is why the Salafus Salihin would say, Hikayatus Salihin jundum min junudillah. That the stories of the pious, the stories of the close servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are jundum min junudillah. They are from the armies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Through the army, a person, an individual protects himself. A person gains support. So through these stories, an individual gains support and protects themselves from the onslaughts of nafs and shaitan. So a person should try to engage with the story of the Salaf. A person should try to engage with the lives of the pious predecessors, because they were humans like us. They weren't superhumans. They weren't some other creation. They were humans like us. And being humans like us, they also had to go through life, had to face challenges, had different forms of situations which they had to engage with, had to deal with. But it is for us to understand how they dealt with these challenges, how they interacted with these problems, with these situations. And it will be not incorrect to say that they faced more challenges than we faced. They faced more difficulties than we faced. They faced more problems than we faced. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself mentions, Ashaddun nasi bala'an al-anbiya. Those individuals who suffered the most and who had to face the greatest difficulties and face adversities were none other than the Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam. And thereafter Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, ثُمَّ الْأَمْثَلْ فَالْأَمْثَلْ. Thereafter those who resemble the Anbiya most, and thereafter those who resemble them most. Meaning those who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those individuals are tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And those individuals are made to undergo difficult circumstances and face difficult situations. And the reason for this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes to bless them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes to grant them a greater status in the hereafter. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes an individual go through difficult circumstances so that they face this situation head on, and through sabr, through istiqamah, through patience and steadfastness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevates their status. One such individual who I'd like to share their story with you today. She was one who had great honor. جمعت المجد من أطرافها كلها. It is as if she had amassed all types of honor and respect. فأبوها صحابي وجدها صحابي وأختها صحابية وزوجها صحابي وابنها صحابي وحسبها بذلك شرفا وفخرا. Her father was a Sahabi. Her grandfather was a Sahabi. Her sister was a Sahabiya. Her husband was a Sahabi. Her son was a Sahabi. وَحَسْبُهَا بِذَلِكَ شَرَفًا وَفَخْرًا. This enough is sufficient for her honor and for her respect. And for her to have a great status in Islam. Who was her father? Abuha as-Siddiq Khalilur Rasul al-Kareem. Her father was none other than Sayyidina Abu Bakr, the close associate of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam through thick and thin. That companion regarding whom Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would say that nobody has done a favor upon me except that I have repaid them. Whoever has done any good to me, whoever has assisted me in any way, whoever has done anything good for me, I have repaid them. مَا خَلَا أَبَا بَكْرٍ فَإِنَّ لَهُ يَدٌ عَلَيَّ. Except for Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, because he has such ihsan and favors and he has assisted me so much that I am unable to repay him in this world. Allah Himself will repay him in the hereafter on behalf of me. أول من أسلم, the very first individual who accepted Islam. Khalifatul Muslimin بالتحقيق, the very first Khalifa of the entire Ummah, consensus of the Ummah, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Sahibul Ghar, the only individual who accompanied Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam during his journey of the Hijrah. Abuha as-Siddiq, this Sahabiya's father was Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Jadduha, her grandfather, was Abu Atiq, Walidu Abu Bakr. The father of Abu Bakr, Abu Quhafa radiyallahu ta'ala an. Ukhtuha, her sister, Ummul Mu'mineen Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha, At-Tahira Al-Mubarra'a. Ummul Mu'mineen Sayyida Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha, who was an ocean of knowledge, who lived a life of chastity, who was the most beloved to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The ulama, the Sahaba state that whenever sometimes upon a group of Sahaba a mas'ala, an issue would become difficult to solve, we would refer it to Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala, and Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala would solve this issue for us. She will guide us according to the sunnah and the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Zawjuha, her husband, فحواري رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الزبير بن العوام. Her husband was Sayyidina Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who was a very close companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of the very first individuals who accepted Islam within the first 10. who accepted Islam and who stayed with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam throughout his life and accompanied him through all the expeditions. One who was guaranteed Jannah and promised Jannah upon the tongue of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Part of the Ashara Mubashara, those 10 individuals who in one sitting were told by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you 10 are going into Jannah. Now who is this? Who was his son? His son Abdullah ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, a very great Sahabi. Abdullah ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So this woman, this Sahabiya, who is she? I hope and I have this hope that you may have worked out who this Sahabiya is. And if you haven't, then it is a time to question oneself that how much do we know regarding these individuals through whose barakah this deen we have today. If so many clues were given to us regarding a particular celebrity, a particular influencer, a particular TikToker, then we'll probably guess it at the first clue. So many clues have been given. If we know, then alhamdulillah, this is something to be happy about. But if we still don't know, then it is a very big question mark in regards to how much we are studying and we are connecting ourselves with our deen and our religion and with those individuals through whose sacrifices Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with Islam. If it wasn't for their sacrifices, if it wasn't for their shedding of blood, if it wasn't for their sleepless nights, if it wasn't for their efforts, then it is possible that this deen wouldn't have reached us. It is possible that we wouldn't have known Allah. We wouldn't have been sitting here in this masjid today. Many efforts have been put throughout the centuries so that this deen remains intact and this deen reaches us. It is important that we try to study and we try to understand the history of Islam. We understand those luminaries throughout the ages who sacrificed their lives so that they could preserve the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahu Akbar. So much zeal they had, so much enthusiasm they had to preserve the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't even need to go back to the time of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the Tabi' Tabi'een and things like this. Just going back in the last few decades, when we read about those Muslim countries who were taken over by non-Muslims and brought under communist rule or brought under military rule, and because of which they had to undergo such torture and such difficulties just to practice upon the deen. And then after their sacrifices, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted them independence. Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed them to freely practice the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala once again. Then when we read their stories and we understand how they preserved the deen, after so many years of being under communist rule, 30, 40, 50 years for some countries. And then people came out when they were able to practice freely upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala once again. And then it was found that there were pockets of huffaz in certain communities, pockets of ulama in certain communities. And then at that time they would ask that, how did you manage to create huffaz during these 20, 30 years when even keeping a beard would be haram and illegal, when even going to the masjid for a salat would bring you into the eye of the government and you'd probably be in prison. Like the situation is nowadays in certain countries, unfortunately. We make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviates the difficulties of these individuals. Just yesterday there was an article which I saw, I didn't get to read, but I saw, and in which just it was written that the certain Uyghur Muslims this year, currently we're talking about now, at this moment in time, they have to break their fast in the toilet. They are unable to break their fast outside anywhere else. They have to go into the toilet where they have some privacy, and they have to break their fast there, because if they are seen to be fasting, then immediately they will be in prison. So we have this deen of Allah, alhamdulillah, we have the ability to freely practice upon it. We need to make shukr for this. And we need to understand that this deen has been granted to us, and we also have the ability to practice upon it. If we still do not practice upon it, then what excuse do we have on the day of Qiyamah? How will we show our face to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Rather, how will we even show our face to these individuals when they would question us and look at us that you had the ability to practice upon the deen, you had the ability to wear the hijab, you had the ability to cover your modesty, but you didn't? We would cry for this and we were unable to. What would you answer them if they were to question us? So we need to, if we study history, then we will see that how these individuals underground in bunkers at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, when the general officers would be sleeping and the police and the security etc. would generally be resting, at that time they would be waking up, going into these bunkers, 2, 3, 4 people at a time in different communities, and there they will be studying the Quran. There they will be studying the Quran, the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, studying masail, how to perform salat. And then quickly in the morning, before the break of dawn, quickly return back home so that nobody notices. And then during the day, act as if they're not Muslims, fearing for their lives. This is the condition. In Turkey, they would be sitting on trains. They would go in the morning, take the train in the morning, and in the morning they would take the train and sit in that train throughout the entire day. Different students would come, the teacher would sit the whole day, different students will come at different stations, and they would sit with the teacher in a corner in one of the cabins in the train, and then they would impart the lesson until the next station, and they would get off and some other students will come on. Away from the eyes of the people. They would exchange papers, exchange books, a few photocopies or whatever, and they would say, this is what you need to study for tomorrow. In that manner they preserved the deen. So these are the sacrifices. So sacrifices have been given throughout the ages. Let us study the lives of these individuals. The Sahaba Kiram radiallahu ta'ala gave the utmost sacrifice. They were there with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They laid the foundation of our deen. With Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose them for the companionship of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So let us study their lives. Let us acquaint ourselves with these personalities. It is these personalities who we wish who we should be wishing to aspire with, who we should be wishing to be with on the day of Qiyamah. So who is this Sahabiya? This Sahabiya is none other than Asma bint Abi Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anha. كانت من السابقات إلى الإسلام. She was one of the first individuals who accepted Islam. إذ لم يتقدم عليها في هذا الفضل العظيم غير 17 إنسانا من رجل أو امرأة. Before her, no more than 17 individuals had accepted Islam. So she was number 18. Right at the beginning, at the inception of Islam. Number 18, Asma bint Abi Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anha. She was there from the beginning, throughout the 23 years of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And she had a title given to her by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. قَدْ لُقِّبَتْ بِذَاتِ النِّطَاقَيْنِ. ذَاتُ النِّطَاقَيْنِ, the one with two belts. Why? Because when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and her father made the migration from Makkatul Mukarramah to Madinatul Munawwarah, then they left during the day, or rather during the nightfall they left, just before the break of dawn. And they had to flee quickly. They took whatever they needed to take, but obviously they were unable to take much provisions, much food, etc. So they rested at the cave outside Makkatul Mukarramah, the cave of Thawr. And it was Asma radiyallahu ta'ala anha, who was not very old at that time. She was in her teens at the most. She would take food, provisions, water for her father and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that this would then help them for the journey to Medina Munawwarah, because it was going to be a long perilous journey. And they remained in that cave just for 3 days, and then they had to go and undertake this journey. So she would take provisions and water to her father and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that they could then take this along with them towards the journey to Medina Munawwarah, along with them in the journey towards Medina Munawwarah. So when she would take this, she had nothing to hold it with. They didn't have carrier bags in those days. So she had nothing to hold it on with. So what she did was she took a piece of cloth and she ripped it into 2 pieces, and then she tied it around her waist, and on one she hung the water and on the other she hung the food and provisions. And in this manner she walked to the cave of Thawr and delivered the provisions to her father and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw this, then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made dua for her. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made dua for her that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you in lieu of this Jannah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you these belts in Jannah that you have made. And obviously, if she's going to get these belts in Jannah, then the whole garment and the entire clothing will be of Jannah. So this was a very great dua by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She in her youth married Sayyidina Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. وَكَانَ شَابًا مُرْمِلًا ليس له خادم ينهض بخدمته أو مال يوسع به على عياله غير فرس اقتناها. When she married Sayyidina Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, then Sayyidina Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was a very poor Sahabi. He didn't have any servants that could carry out the day-to-day duties of the house. He never had any wealth which he could spend without any worry or concern and freely upon his own family members. The only thing he had was one horse, and that is it. He had just one horse. But what he did have was a very beautiful, caring wife, Asma radiyallahu ta'ala anha. He would be with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, around Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he was a very close companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So she تخدمه وتسوس فرسه وترعاه وتطحن النوى لعلفه حتى فتح الله عليه فغدا من أغنى أغنياء الصحابة. She would look after all the affairs of the house. She would serve him. She would look after the horse. She would not only look after the horse, but she would gather the seeds of the dates, the date pits, and then with her own hand she would grind these date pits and then feed it to the horse. And she would say that this was the most difficult task. She would go out and carry water upon her head and return back home. But she would save her husband. She wouldn't complain. And through these sacrifices, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed them to such an extent that Sayyidina Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu then became one of the most wealthiest Sahaba. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses a household through the sacrifices they go through. Sometimes you need to go through difficult circumstances. And you need to understand that the wife holds a very pivotal role in the house. Once Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam, in the narration, a very lengthy narration of Ibn Abbas radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, recorded by Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala in his Sahih. He states that when Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam left his family inside in the wilderness, thereafter the tribe of Jurhum, they settled around Makkah Mukarramah because there was water there, and a little community finally grew there. Otherwise at that time it was just in a valley in the wilderness. Then the community grew. Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam grew up, and he married a lady from the tribe of Jurhum. Once Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam visited his son. He came home, Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam wasn't there. And he questioned his daughter-in-law, who didn't recognize him, she didn't know who he was. And neither did Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam introduce himself. She was questioned by Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam that, where is your husband? So she replied, he's gone out. He's gone out to bring provisions for the day, etc. So he says, how is your general day-to-day life, etc. So she started to complain. We have to go through great difficulty. We have to face much poverty. We don't have much in the house. It's very hard, etc., etc. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam listened quietly. And after listening quietly, he then said that, okay, that's fine. And he took leave, and he said that just before I go, I'd like to just give a message, if you can pass it on to your husband when he comes back. And the message is that tell him to change his doorstep. And then he left. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam returned, Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam returned. And after returning, he realized the ruhaniya and the spirituality that was present around his house because of the status of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. So he asked that, it seems as if somebody has come here. Did somebody come? So she replied, yes, some old man came. He says, who, what, did he say anything? And he says, he asked regarding the house and the affairs of the house, how life is going, etc. And I spoke to him for a short while, and I told him how things were, how much difficulty we are facing, etc. He says, did he mention anything else? And he says, yeah, he gave one message. He said, change the doorstep of your house. So he replied that that was none other than my father. And the doorstep is none other than you. So what he means is, I need to change you. So he sent her away, and he says that you are no longer my wife. He got married again. He got married again after a short while. A few years passed, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam returned again. And after returning, same question, answer, and this time the wife was sabira, shakira, very grateful, had patience, and she spoke well of her situation at home, although the house situation was still the same. And this time Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam listened, and on his way out he said that just give one message of mine to your husband. He says, tell him to keep hold of this doorstep. Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam returned, the same conversation took place, and this time he informed her that my father told me to hold on fast to you. So the woman of the house holds a very integral part. If you look at the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sayyida Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha states that I was the most jealous from all the wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I was most jealous of Sayyida Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha, although she was not even a wife when I was a wife. She had passed away before I came into the marriage of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But despite this, I was the most jealous of her. Why? Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would remember her so fondly, so much, that I would feel that he loved her the most, and even I wasn't as beloved to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as her. So much so that whenever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would slaughter an animal, he would send parts and portion of the food to the friends of Sayyida Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha that were residing around Medina Munawwara. After she had passed away, she passed away in Makkah Mukarramah, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated after another 3, 4, even possibly even 5 years to Medina Munawwara, and thereafter Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would still look out for the friends of Sayyida Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Once the sister of Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha came to the house of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, knocked on the door and said salam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam got so happy because she sounded just like Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha. So once Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala herself states that, how long will you remember that old woman for? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with a young woman like me, how much are you going to remember that old woman for? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam got angry and he says, Aisha, don't speak ill regarding my Khadija, because she was there for me through thick and thin. Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha was there and as a support for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he needed that moral support from the house. Yes, he had support from his Sahaba, but the support that an individual can gain in the house and the way, the support that the wife can give the husband and the husband can give the wife, that support nobody else can give. And unfortunately, this is lacking in our society today, in our communities today. The amount of people that are going through difficulties in their homes, and where the majority of the reason is that I just need my own space and he's intruding in my space, or he's saying that she's intruding in my space. There's no understanding of the relationship between the husband and the wife. So nevertheless, Sayyida Asma bint Abi Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anha, she would look after the entire affairs of the home, look after Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala an. And through the sacrifices, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed them so much that they became one of the most wealthy family in Medina Munawwara. When you look at the time of her hijrah, لما أتيح لها أن تهاجر إلى المدينة فرارا بدينها إلى الله ورسوله كانت قد أتمت حملها بابنها عبد الله بن الزبير. When she was given the opportunity to make hijrah, and now the circumstances were such that for her and her husband to remain in Makkah Mukarramah was just not practical, and fearing for the deen, they decided that let us now perform the hijrah. What was her condition? Her condition was that she was about to give birth to her child. She was right before her final term during her pregnancy. But فَلَمْ يَمْنَعْهَا ذَلِكَ مِنْ تَحَمُّلِ مَشَاقِّ الرِّحْلَةِ الطَّوِيلَةِ. That did not prevent her to undertake this difficult journey. She didn't think that I'm expecting and not now, just wait till I give birth, then after, once I recover from giving birth, etc. No. For the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she was willing to give this sacrifice. And she made this journey, and she hadn't even reached Medina Munawwara. She just got to the outskirts of Medina Munawwara. فَمَا إِن بَلَغَتْ قُبَى. She got to Quba and she reached Quba حتى وضعت وليدها. She gave birth to her son Abdullah ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And when she gave birth to Abdullah ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, this was a momentous occasion for the Muslims of Medina Munawwara. فَكَبَّرَ الْمُسْلِمُونَ وَهَلَّلُوا. They all became joyous and elated, and in this joy and elation they called out the takbir and the tahleel and the la ilaha illallah. Why? Because this was the very, very first child to be born to the muhajirin. فَكَانَ أَوَّلَ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدٌ لِلْمُهَاجِرِينَ فِي الْمَدِينَةِ. When the people, Makkah, when they migrated to Medina Munawwara, then approximately 2 years had passed. Or a number of months, 1 to 2 years if I recall correctly, had passed, and not a single child was born to the muhajirin. So the Banu Israel of Medina Munawwara would taunt the Muslims, and they say, see, you have come here, because of that we have made dua against you, and because of that no child will be born to you. So when Abdullah ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was born, this was a momentous occasion for all the believers. فَحَمَلَتْهُ إِلَىٰ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. Immediately, this child was born. What do? Immediately, the very first thing that came to their mind was, let us take this child to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They took this child to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَوَضَعَتْهُ فِي حِجْرِهِ. And they placed this child in the blessed lap of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahu Akbar. How fortunate were these individuals and these souls. They got to sit in the lap of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And not only this, but thereafter فَأَخَذَ شَيْئًا مِّن رِيقِهِ وَجَعَلَهُ فِي فَمِ الصَّبِيِّ ثُمَّ حَنَّكَهُ وَدَعَا لَهُ. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took some of his blessed saliva and put his blessed saliva in the mouth of Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And thereafter Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made dua for Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. فَكَانَ أَوَّلَ مَا دَخَلَ فِي جَوْفِهِ رِيقُ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم. The very first thing which came into the mouth of Abdullah ibn Zubair before his own mother's milk was the blessed saliva of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وقد اجتمع لأسماء بنت أبي بكر من خصائل الخير وشمائل النبل ورجاحة العقل ما لم يجتمع إلا للقليل النادر من الرجال. She had such qualities, she had such intelligence that very few individuals could compete with her. And her generosity was such that which was unparalleled. People would say that such a person is as generous as Asma. Such a person is as generous as Asma. That's how generous she was. Abdullah ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu himself states that مَا رَأَيْتُ إِمْرَأَتَيْنِ قَدْتُ أَجْوَدَ مِنْ خَالَتِي عَيْشَةَ وَأُمِّ أَسْمَاءَ. I have never seen anybody who is more generous than my auntie Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha and my mother Asma radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Extremely generous. Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha was so generous and would spend so much in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that once Abdullah ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he said that I will stop my auntie from spending in the path of Allah. Because she is spending so much that she has to face difficulties herself financially. So I will stop her spending in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's how much she would spend in the path of Allah. A large amount of money came. And immediately she distributed the entire amount. After she distributed the entire amount, her maid said to her that if you would have left a little bit, at least we could have had something to do iftar with. We're both fasting, but we don't have anything in the house to do iftar with. Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala said, you should have told me a little bit before. I didn't even think of that. Subhanallah. It was in the thousands. It was in the thousands, and she distributed all of it before, in one day, even before the time of Maghrib. Give this much to this person, this much to this person, this much over there, this much over there, this much over there, this much over there. Immediately in the thousands distributed. And she didn't even think that I need to keep something for myself, for my own iftar. So when Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha heard that Ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu said this. Now Ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala was very, very beloved to Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Very beloved. So much so that because Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha didn't have any children of her own, she was known as Abdullah. She was known as the mother of Abdullah ibn Zubair, her own nephew. Because there was a very strong bond between the two. They were very fond of each other. So, when she heard that my own nephew is saying that he's going to stop me from spending in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she took a qasam and an oath that I will not speak with my son. I will not speak with Abdullah ibn Zubair. How dare he stop me from doing good? Abdullah ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala came to know of this, and he became very, very disturbed. Very, very upset. And he sent different people so that they could intercede on his behalf Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha just replied that, what can I do now? I've made a qasam. I can't break the qasam, I can't break an oath. What do you want me to do? One day, Abdullah ibn Zubair radiallahu ta'ala anhu decided that I am just going to somehow get to my auntie and speak to her. So he went with a few of his friends and they knocked at the door of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha said that, who is it? So the person said, it's me and I've got a couple of friends as well, can we come in? So that we can learn some ahadith from you, we can gain from the treasures which you have amassed from the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She said, yes, come in. She was sitting behind the veil and these individuals sat on the other side. Abdullah ibn Zubair radiallahu ta'ala anhu was with them, so he entered into the house. When he got permission to enter into the house, then he went on the other side of the veil because it was his own auntie, so he was allowed. So he went onto the other side and he embraced his auntie. And they both embraced each other and they cried. And they cried greatly. And then he cried to her that, please, please talk to me. Please, please talk to me. I admit I made a mistake and I shouldn't have said that. And then she spoke to him. She spoke to him, and because she broke her qasam, to break the qasam you have to have kafara. So she gave the kafara. And the kafara is that you need to either free one slave or feed 10 poor people. So she did this. But the guilt of breaking her qasam was so much that she did not feel satisfied, and she would spend even more in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now, that this would be the kafara for breaking my promise and breaking my oath. So that is how much Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha would spend. And Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Zubair radiallahu ta'ala anha would say that my mum would spend the same as well. But he says that their spending habits were slightly different. وَلَكِنَّ جُودَهُمَا مُخْتَلِفٌ. Their spending habits was different. أما خالتي فكانت تجمع الشيء إلى الشيء حتى إذا اجتمع عندها ما يكفي قسمتها بين ذوي الحاجات. My auntie Aisha would amass little bit until it would come to a significant amount, and thereafter she would spend it amongst the poor. Whereas my mother Asma radiallahu ta'ala anha, her habit was that فَكَانَتْ لَا تُمْسِكُ شَيْئًا إِلَّا الْغَدِ. She would not even keep anything until tomorrow. Come today, gone. Come today, gone. Come today, gone. That is how much she would spend in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's other few incidents as well, inshallah, I'd like to mention. So maybe if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows, we shall continue, inshallah, the following week, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to connect ourselves with our pious predecessors, to understand how much sacrifices they gave, to understand their personalities, their qualities, their characteristics, and allow us, more importantly, to emulate their characteristics and qualities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to emulate them, and because of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be with them on the day of Qiyamah and with them in the high stages of Jannah. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. وصلى الله تعالى خير خلق محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله النبي الأمي الكريم. اللهم لك الحمد حمدا دائما ولك الشكر شكرا دائما. اللهم لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. اللهم لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. يا حي يا قيوم يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. اللهم ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا كلها دقها وجلها أولها وآخرها علانيتها وسرها يا أرحم الراحمين يا أكرم الأكرمين يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, you are the most merciful, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, you are the most kind. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, you are the most gracious. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al Akrameen, there is nobody who is more generous than you. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, there is nobody who is more merciful than you. Ya Allah, there is nobody who is more gracious than you. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, there is nobody who is more forgiving than you. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al Akrameen, this is at normal times, Ya Allah. In the month of Ramadan, this graciousness, this forgiveness, Ya Allah, this mercy increases, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al Akrameen, we are in need of your mercy. We are in need of your forgiveness. Ya Allah, we are in need of your grace. Ya Allah, we are in need of your generosity, Ya Allah. Ya Akram al-Akrameen, Ya Dhal Jalali wal Ikram, Ya Dhal Jalali wal Ikram, forgive all our sins, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, forgive our sins, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, in this blessed month of Ramadan, in this month of mercy, Ya Allah, in this month of forgiveness, Ya Allah, do not deprive us, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, do not deprive us, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, do not deprive us, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, shower us with your mercy and your grace and your forgiveness, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, shower us with goodness, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, shower us with khair and goodness, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, we are weak, Ya Allah. Even in the month of Ramadan, Ya Allah, despite shaitan being locked, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, despite your doors of mercy being open, Ya Allah. Despite your doors of wrath and anger, Ya Allah, being closed, Ya Allah. We are unable to, Ya Allah, control ourselves, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, we are unable to control our eyes, Ya Allah. We are unable to control our tongues, Ya Allah. We are unable to control our ears, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, Ya Zal Jalali wal Ikram. Forgive our sins, Ya Allah. Grant us tawfiq, Ya Allah. Grant us tawfiq, Ya Allah. Grant us tawfiq, Ya Allah. Ya Akram al-Akrameen, times are tough, Ya Allah. Times are difficult, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, you granted the pious, Ya Allah, the Salaf al-Salihin, our predecessors, Ya Allah, the ability to make these sacrifices, Ya Allah. You granted the ability for them to remain steadfast, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, they were physically tortured, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, they were physically hurt, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, they had to sacrifice their lives, Ya Allah. They have to sacrifice their wealth, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahimeen, all we need to do, Ya Allah, is sacrifice our nafs, Ya Allah. Sacrifice our desires, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahimeen, grant us the ability, Ya Allah. Grant us the strength, Ya Allah. Grant us the tawfiq, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahimeen, we cannot do anything until you wish, Ya Allah. Ya Akram al-Akrameen, we cannot take one step unless you desire, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahimeen, grant us the willpower, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahimeen, when we take that first step, Ya Allah, you make every step easy for us, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahim, you are so merciful, Ya Allah. We just need to take that one step and you will pull us towards you, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahim, you yourself say, فَأَمَّا مَنْ أَعْطَى وَاتَّقَى وَصَدَّقَ بِالْحُسْنَى فَسَنُيَسِّرُهُ لِلْيُسْرَى. Ya Rahman Rahim, you say that person who tries, Ya Allah, you will make the path easy for him, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahim, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, you will make it easy for him, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahim, initially it will be difficult, Ya Allah. But Ya Allah, after that it will become easy, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahimeen, let us make that initial, Ya Allah, first step, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahimeen, allow us to remain steadfast upon the deen. Keep us connected to the deen, Ya Allah. Keep us connected to the Quran, Ya Allah. Keep us connected to the Sunnah, Ya Allah. Let us cherish every moment in this month of Ramadan, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahimeen, allow us to utilize every second in this month of Ramadan, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahimeen, safeguard us from wasting our time, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahimeen, social media is killing our time, Ya Allah. And not only that, Ya Allah, it is killing our spirituality as well, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahimeen, it is influencing us mentally, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, Ya Dhal Jalali wal Ikram, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, safeguard us from all these fitan, Ya Allah. Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, these fitans are coming upon us, Ya Allah. Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, times are difficult, Ya Allah. Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, so much change, Ya Allah, within a short span of time, Ya Allah. Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, to remain steadfast upon the deen has become very difficult, Ya Allah. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us that it would become more difficult than holding on to a
burning coal, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimin, we feel that this time we are experiencing, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimin, Ya Akram al-Akramin, grant us steadfastness, Ya Allah. Grant us istiqamah, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, grant us the tawfiq, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, make it easy for us, Ya Allah. Make it easy for us, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimin, this month is a month of training, Ya Allah. If we train ourselves, Ya Allah, then remaining 11 months will be easy, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimin, allow us to, Ya Allah, utilize this month properly, Ya Allah. Ya Akram al-Akrameen, whatever ibadat we do, Ya Allah, accept this in the month of Ramadan. O Rahman Rahim, accept our tilawat, accept our du'as, accept our standing in front of you, Ya Allah. O Rahman Rahim, accept our dhikr tasbih. Ya Rahman Rahim, accept our tawbah, Ya Allah. O Rahman Rahim, this life of sin we have, Ya Allah, spent, Ya Allah. We have spent many years, Ya Allah, sinning, Ya Allah. O Rahman Rahim, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, we turn to you. Ya Rahman Rahim, we beseech you. Ya Allah, we invoke your mercy, Ya Allah. O Rahman Rahim, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, forgive our sins, Ya Allah. Forgive all our sins, Ya Allah. Forgive our major sins, minor sins, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimin, you have concealed our sins, Ya Allah, till today. Wa Rahman Rahimin, do not expose us, Ya Allah, neither in this world, neither in the hereafter, Ya Allah. Do not expose our sins in front of our parents, Ya Allah. Do not expose our sins in front of our teachers, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimin, do not expose our sins in front of our friends and family, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, you know what we have done, Ya Allah. We know what we have done, Ya Allah. Ya Akram al-Akrameen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, shower us with your mercy and keep this veil, Ya Allah, over our sins, Ya Allah, until we breathe our last, Ya Allah, and even on the day of Qiyamah, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, grant us shade of your arsh on the day of Qiyamah, Ya Allah. Ya Akram al-Akrameen, Ya Rahman Rahim, people are going through difficulties, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, alleviate their difficulties, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahim, some people are suffering through illness, Ya Allah. Some people are suffering domestic issues, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, some people are financially, Ya Allah, going through a difficult time, Ya Allah. Some people are going through difficult times spiritually, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, some people are suffering mentally, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, remove their problems, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, make it easy for them, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, those who have passed away, Ya Allah, illuminate their graves, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, grant them the barakat of Ramadan as well, Ya Allah. Show them the mercy, Ya Allah. Ya Rahman Rahim, shower them with mercy, Ya Allah. Ya shower them with maghfirah, Ya Allah. Grant them the breeze of Jannah, Ya Allah, in their graves. Wa Rahman Rahim, let them experience the coolness and the enjoyment of Jannah in their graves, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, grant us all steadfastness upon the deen until we breathe our last as well, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, grant us death with Iman, Ya Allah. Make our stages of the hereafter easy, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, Muslims in the world are suffering, Ya Allah. Grant the Muslim countries, Ya Allah, istiqamah, Ya Allah. Grant them unity, Ya Allah. Grant us good leaders, Ya Allah. Grant us leaders who are good for the Muslims, Ya Allah, who have concern for Islam, Ya Allah, who have the welfare of Islam and the Muslims at the forefront, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, those leaders who have these qualities, Ya Allah, grant them steadfastness, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, safeguard them, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, and those leaders who do not have this, Ya Allah, Wa Rahman Rahim, grant them the ability, or grant others in their place, Ya Allah, who have this concern and worry, Ya Allah. O Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, safeguard us from all types of fitan, Ya Allah. Safeguard the Muslim Ummah from all types of difficulties, Ya Allah. The Muslims in Sham, Ya Allah. The Muslims in Palestine, Ya Allah. The Muslims in China, Ya Allah. The Muslims in Kashmir, Ya Allah. The Muslims in India, Ya Allah. The Muslims in throughout the world, wherever they may be, Ya Allah. O Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, safeguard them, Ya Allah. O Rahman Rahim, have mercy upon us, Ya Allah. Open the doors of nusra and help, Ya Allah, and assistance. Ya Allah, we need divine assistance, Ya Allah. Without your divine assistance, Ya Allah, the roads are looking bleak, Ya Allah, tight, Ya Allah, closed, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, open these doors for us, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, give us your divine assistance and divine help, Ya Allah. Ya Rabbana atina fi dunya hasanatan fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina adhaban nar. Ya Allah, accept this masjid, accept this community, accept the musallis, accept our madrasa. Wa Rahman Rahimeen, Ya Akram al-Akrameen, make it a center of hidayah, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, make it a center of hidayah, Ya Allah. Make it a center of hidayah, Ya Allah. Fulfill all the needs of this community, Ya Allah, from the spiritual aspect as well, Ya Allah, and a material aspect here as well, Ya Allah. Whatever is good for us in terms of our deen and the hereafter, Ya Allah. Whatever is good for us in terms of this world, Ya Allah. Wa Rahman Rahim, fulfill all our needs of this world and of the hereafter. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك التواب الرحيم رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين برحمتك يا رحمن.